We tend to think of this as the beginning of an era. In fact, it's the climax of a forgotten chapter in European history. In the year 711 AD, Muslim forces invaded Spain and created a society so rich and so powerful it was the envy of the known world. This wasn't the rigid, ferocious Islam of our imaginations, but a progressive, sensuous, intellectually curious culture that for a number of spine-tingling years looked set to sweep through the whole of Europe. It is an incredible story, but one that has been systematically written out of history. After the Catholic monarchs took over the city of Granada, they began to destroy all evidence that the Muslims had ever been in Spain. These people have become known as the Moors. Propaganda, sparked by the Crusades, has given us an enduring image. The diabolical Moor, a dark-skinned, savage, alien enemy. Now, archaeologists and historians are starting to piece together the real story of the Moors in Spain. They're uncovering the remains of hidden cities. Not a single account of life here survives. All its archives were incinerated in the fires of the Inquisition. But the Catholics couldn't bring themselves to destroy this place. The Alhambra is one of the wonders of the medieval world, and by preserving it, they've kept a box of secrets that we can use to decode the civilization that built it. Inside the palace walls, the architecture is breathtaking. Every detail of the palace decoration seems to be part of a scheme. Row upon row of intricate geometric patterns are carved into the woodwork of the walls and windows. This is the throne room. It was the symbolic centre of the palace, and here the Sultan had a kind of psychological advantage over his subjects. Whereas he'd have stood here, an eerie silhouette, they'd have been blinded by the light that came streaming in through these brightly coloured stained glass windows. But this is far more than just a beautiful building. There's a specific reason why it feels so harmonious. The men who built it had a knowledge of complex geometry which had originated in the ancient world. The Alhambra is so enchanting, it's all too easy to view it as a fairy tale palace, isolated from history. But that is romantic nonsense. This palace was the product of a very real, very gritty history. The Alhambra was built by a religious empire which, at the pinnacle of its power, dominated land from China to Africa. An empire which had the wealth and intellect to build such masterpieces.
What it says in Arabic is, I am the apogee of knowledge. Come, you Muslims. Come and learn, because with knowledge you can become what you want to be.
They were well versed in using the stars as guiding devices. This developed into a very sophisticated study of astronomy. Then with the establishment of Islam, that knowledge was applied in a new way. Whenever a mosque was built, the prayer niche had to be orientated in direct relation to Mecca, and there were a number of religious festivals that had to fall on certain days in the lunar year.
These were complex mathematical problems for which the Muslims devised precise solutions. Islam became a culture which naturally embraced scientific and mathematical investigation. This uninhibited attitude towards learning meant that when Muslims encountered the teachings of other cultures, they seized upon them vigorously.
From the Bronze Age onwards, there'd been a constant exchange of artifacts and information all across the Eastern Mediterranean. And in fact, a number of Greek ideas stem from Eastern and Egyptian influences.
This little stretch of water between Spain and Morocco is only 9 miles wide, but it's come to represent some kind of cultural chasm between Europe and Africa. But in the 8th century, when sea travel was the way to get around, that wasn't a barrier, it was a highway. In July 711, 7,000 Berber tribesmen stormed across the Straits of Gibraltar and invaded Europe. The Muslims then began an incredible process of expansion. In just 4 years, they'd colonised almost the whole of Spain, had crossed the Pyrenees, and were only halted at Poitiers in France.
The Muslims started to build a new society.
The enthusiasm for learning that the Islamic world had spent years nurturing was about to be transmitted to Europe.
This is the secret of how such a great civilization came to be born.
The foundations of a new society had been laid. A self-confident, progressive and sophisticated civilization had arrived among the failing states of Europe. And the continent's history was about to be transformed. The Alhambra was the creation of the richest, most intellectually powerful civilization in the world. The roots of this cultural and religious explosion lie not in Spain, but in the deserts of... The Muslim invasion of Spain had been swift and effective, but it lacked a strong leadership. The first wave of invaders were North African tribesmen. His mother had been from North Africa, and Abd al-Rahman must have grown up hearing tales of Al-Andalus. And so he made a dangerous journey across the Nile and the deserts of Egypt, heading for those distant lands. Abd al-Rahman brought culture and learning from the centre of the Islamic world straight to the heart of Al-Andalus.
When Abd al-Rahman arrived in Spain, he came here to Cordoba, where the city was in complete disarray.
Abderrahman brought cutting-edge technology for irrigation to Spain. Almost immediately, the landscape was transformed. Palm trees, lemon and orange groves, avocados, artichokes and pomegranates, none of which had been seen in Europe. Because of Abderrahman's sophisticated trade network, this new agriculture created huge wealth. And these riches were used to build one of the greatest cities in the world. While the inhabitants of London were still living in wooden houses, the people of Cordoba had built a cosmopolitan city with a population of over 100,000, the largest settlement in Europe. Reports from European visitors to Cordoba describe a city with 70 libraries and over 300 public baths. The accounts tell of houses with running water and roads illuminated by streetlights.
You often have to take medieval sources with a fairly substantial pinch of salt because chroniclers were extremely fond of exaggeration. But in fact, the new excavations here at Cordoba are actually revealing a city that was just as rich as the one that they described. These monumental palace walls belong to a Muslim aristocrat, and this channel over here is part of the water system that brought Cordoba its famously effective sewage works, as well as the fountains and the baths that so impressed all those European visitors.
Cordoba was described by a 10th century German visitor as the ornament of the world. Abderrahman built Cordoba on top of what had been one of the largest cities in Roman Spain, outshining all that went before. And his greatest achievement was this: the Great Mosque of Cordoba.
Standard history books present the Muslim occupation of Spain as something that was superficial. New archaeological evidence is turning that idea on its head.
All over Spain, cities like Cordoba were established. Even Madrid. By aligning the needle to the grid using the measurements, the time can be read off the face of the astrolabe, just like a clock. The astrolabe enabled nighttime navigation, which helped to advance sea travel, and this in turn set the stage for the coming era of worldwide exploration and discovery. Cordoban scientists were streets ahead of the rest of Europe, especially when it came to medicine. The hospitals of Cordoba were performing operations which wouldn't be seen in the rest of Europe for hundreds of years. As well as large scientific collections, more everyday documents have survived from Islamic Cordoba. These give a detailed insight to the society that was created here.
What kinds of things are being recorded on these bits of paper?
In this document there was written everything, absolutely everything.
Have you got any physical examples of these documents?
Yes, I have one. Well, it is a contract about plowing the land. For 2 years we have to plant it with wheat and food, and he gets from this proportion of the production.
Every piece of evidence from Cordoba adds to the picture of a civilized and highly sophisticated city. It had medical centres, an organised legal system, and libraries full of academics and scientists working on ideas which were light years ahead of anything else in Europe. Abd al-Rahman III built himself one of the biggest royal palaces in the world. While the English kings of the same period were living in modest wooden halls, Abd al-Rahman III needed 10,000 workmen to construct this enormous palace complex, which was decorated with African white marble. The alabaster palace, surrounded by acres of date palms, was described as a concubine lying in the arms of a black eunuch. And Arabic translations of Greek geometry and those new Arabic numerals were passed on to craftsmen and architects. This was a critical stage in the growth of Western thought. We should no longer see the Renaissance as a rebirth, but the continuation of an intellectual movement which had been nourished centuries earlier.
The Italian Renaissance is famous for reviving classical learning, but in fact what's happening here 400 years earlier seems to be just as vital. Do you think that Muslim scholars aren't given due credit for what they're doing in Islamic Spain at this time?
It is not something that you would learn about in school, probably, or even at university. It was probably conscious process of neglect, and now we are still suffering from that.
Extremely selective history writing.
That's right.